What if I told you the Old Testament isn't just ancient history? It's the blueprint of reality itself. Before the first star ignited, before time had a name, there was a voice in the darkness. And when it spoke, everything changed forever. This isn't the Sunday school version you remember. This is the raw, unfiltered epic that shaped civilizations, inspired revolutions, and still haunts our deepest questions about existence. We're talking about a garden where immortality was lost in a single bite, a flood that erased the world, a tower that tried to storm heaven, brothers who sold their sibling into slavery, plagues that humbled the mightiest empire on earth. But here's what makes it truly mind-blowing. Every story connects like a cosmic puzzle. The serpent in Eden links to the bronze serpent in the desert. The ram caught in the thicket echoes the Passover lamb. The blood on doorframes in Egypt mirrors the sacrifice in the garden's shadow. You're about to witness the Old Testament like never before, not as disconnected tales, but as one breathtaking narrative where every thread matters, every detail points somewhere, and nothing happens by accident. Ready to see what you've been missing? In the beginning, there was nothing but darkness and emptiness. The earth had no form, no shape, no purpose. Deep waters covered everything, and the Spirit of God moved across the surface of this dark void. Then something incredible happened. God spoke. On the first day, as Genesis chapter 1 verse 3 tells us, God said, "Let there be light," and light burst into existence. He saw that the light was good, so he separated it from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Evening came, then morning. The first day was complete. The second day brought structure to the chaos. God spoke again, and a vast expanse appeared, dividing the waters. Some waters remained below, others were lifted above. God called this expanse sky. Evening passed, morning came, the second day. On the third day, God gathered the waters below into one place, and dry ground appeared. He called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters seas. But God wasn't finished with that day. He spoke again, commanding the land to produce vegetation, plants bearing seeds and trees bearing fruit with seeds inside them. The earth obeyed, bursting with green life. Everything reproduced according to its kind. Evening and morning marked the third day. The fourth day transformed the sky. God created two great lights, as described in Genesis 1:16, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. These lights would serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. The sun, moon, and stars took their positions in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. The fourth day ended. On the fifth day, God filled the waters and the skies with life. He said in Genesis 1:20, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the expanse of the sky." God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing that moves in the waters, along with every winged bird according to their kinds. He blessed them, telling them to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. Evening came, then morning, the fifth day. The sixth day was the most remarkable yet. God created the land animals, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. Then God did something completely different. Genesis 1:26 records him saying, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Genesis 2:7 gives us more detail about how this happened. "The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. God blessed them and said to them in Genesis 1:28, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." He gave them every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it for food. To all the animals and birds, God gave every green plant for food. God looked at everything he had made, and it was very good. The sixth day closed. On the seventh day, God's work was complete. Genesis 2:2-3 says, "By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." After creating man, whom he named Adam, God planted a garden in the east, in a place called Eden. This wasn't just any garden, it was a paradise designed specifically for humanity. Genesis 2:9 tells us that God made all kinds of trees grow there, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden stood two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river watered the garden, and from there it separated into 4 headwaters. The first was named Pishon, which wound through the entire land of Havilah, where gold could be found. Genesis 2:12 notes that the gold of that land was good, and aromatic resin and onyx were also there. The second river was the Gihon, winding through the entire land of Cush. The third was the Tigris, running along the east side of Asher, and the fourth river was the Euphrates. God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. This was meaningful work, tending to the perfect creation God had made. Then God gave Adam a command. As Genesis 2:16-17 records, the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die." One boundary, one rule. Everything else was freely given, but this one tree was forbidden. The warning was clear. Eating from it would bring death. Then the Lord God said something important in Genesis 2:18. "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." So God formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. Whatever the man called each living creature, that became its name. Genesis 2:20 says, "The man gave names to all the livestock, the birds of the air, and all the beasts of the field. But for Adam himself, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While he slept, God took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. When Adam saw her, he spoke the first recorded human words in Genesis 2:23. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Genesis 2:24 explains that this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Everything was perfect, innocent, and pure in the garden. There was nothing to hide, nothing to fear, and nothing broken between them or between them and God. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day, this creature approached the woman with a question. Genesis 3:1 records the serpent asking her, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" The woman answered him, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" She knew what God had commanded. She understood the boundary. But notice she added something. God had said not to eat from it, but she included, "You must not touch it." Whether this was her own addition or something Adam had told her, it showed she knew the tree was off limits. But the serpent contradicted God's word directly. In Genesis 3:4-5, the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." These words planted something dangerous in the woman's mind. The serpent had twisted everything. He made God's warning sound like a lie. He made God's boundaries sound like jealousy. He suggested that God was holding them back, keeping something good from them, protecting his own position rather than protecting them. The serpent promised enlightenment, godlikeness, opened eyes. He made disobedience sound like wisdom and rebellion sound like growth. What was once simply off limits now appeared desirable. What was once a boundary of love now looked like a barrier to something better. The serpent's question had done its work, turning the woman's heart away from trust and toward doubt. The woman stood before the tree, and everything looked different now. Genesis 3:6 describes what she saw. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. Just like that, the boundary was crossed, but she didn't stop there. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. Adam didn't question it. He didn't remind her of God's command. He didn't refuse. He simply took the fruit and ate. Immediately, something changed. Genesis 3:7 says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." Their eyes were opened, just as the serpent had promised, but not in the way they had hoped. Instead of becoming like God, they suddenly realized they were vulnerable, exposed, and ashamed. Something inside them had broken. They grabbed fig leaves, sewed them together, and covered themselves. For the first time, they felt the need to hide. Then they heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Instead of running toward him, as they once would have, the man and his wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Fear had entered the human heart for the first time. The Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" Adam answered from his hiding place in Genesis 3:10, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." God asked him, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" Adam immediately shifted the blame. Genesis 3:12 records him saying, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." He pointed his finger at both the woman and ultimately at God himself for giving her to him. Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" She also deflected responsibility, saying in Genesis 3:13, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." No one took full responsibility. The serpent blamed no one because God didn't even ask him. The woman blamed the serpent. The man blamed the woman and God. The perfect fellowship between God and humanity had shattered in a single moment of disobedience. God addressed the serpent first. Without even asking for an explanation, the Lord God said to the serpent in Genesis 3:14-15, "Cursed are you above all the livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This was both a curse and a promise. The serpent would be brought low, humiliated, crawling in the dust. But more importantly, one day the woman's offspring would crush the serpent's head, a fatal blow. The serpent would strike his heel, a wound, but not a killing blow. This was the first hint of a future rescue. Then God turned to the woman. He said in Genesis 3:16, "I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." The beautiful gift of bringing new life into the world would now be accompanied by pain and struggle. The harmony between husband and wife would be disrupted by conflict and power struggles. Finally, God spoke to Adam. Genesis 3:17-19 records the weight of these words. "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Work, which had been joyful and fulfilling, would now involve frustration, exhaustion, and resistance. The ground itself, the very dirt from which Adam was made, had been cursed because of him. It would fight back with thorns and thistles. And death, which had only been a warning, was now humanity's certain future. Dust you are, and to dust you will return. Adam named his wife Eve, because she would become the mother of all the living. Then the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. This simple act required death, the first blood shed in the perfect world. An innocent animal died to cover their shame. And the Lord God said in Genesis 3:22, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. Genesis 3:24 says, "After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life." Paradise was lost. The gates were closed. Humanity would never return. Adam and Eve began their life outside the garden. Genesis 4:1 tells us Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. The boys grew up and chose different paths. Abel kept flocks. He was a shepherd. Cain worked the soil. He was a farmer, following in his father's footsteps. Time passed, and the day came when both brothers brought offerings to the Lord. Genesis 4:3-4 tells us what happened. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Notice the difference. Cain brought some of his fruits, but Abel brought the fat portions from the firstborn. Abel gave his best. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. The text doesn't explain exactly why, but the result was clear. Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain in Genesis 4:6-7, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." This was a clear warning and an invitation. God gave Cain a chance to choose differently, to master the anger and jealousy rising within him. God himself was speaking to Cain, offering him a way back. But Cain didn't listen. Instead, Genesis 4:8 says, "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him." The first human death was murder. Brother killing brother. The son of Adam spilled the blood of his own flesh. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain replied with cold indifference in Genesis 4:9, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord in Genesis 4:13-14, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him in Genesis 4:15, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden, carrying his guilt and isolation with him. Time moved forward, and humanity began to multiply across the earth. Genesis 4:25 tells us Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Generations passed, from Seth to Enosh to Kenan to Mahalalel to Jared to Enoch. Something extraordinary happened with Enoch. Genesis 5:21-24 says, "When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him away." He didn't die like other men. God simply took him. Enoch's son Methuselah lived longer than any other human, 969 years according to Genesis 5:27. Through Methuselah came Lamech, and through Lamech came Noah. Genesis 5:29 records that Lamech named him Noah, saying, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." By this time people had spread far and wide across the earth, but something dark was happening. Genesis 6:1-2 records that when men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said in Genesis 6:3, "My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Genesis 6:4 describes something strange. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. These Nephilim were giants, mighty warriors, famous throughout the ancient world. But their presence marked something wrong in creation, a further corruption of the order God had established. The earth was filling with people, but not in the way God had intended. As humanity spread and multiplied, something terrible happened. Genesis 6:5 describes the state of the world. "The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time." This wasn't just occasional sin or isolated bad choices. Every thought, every intention, every inclination of the human heart had become continuously evil. There was no break in it, no pause, no moment of goodness. The corruption was total and constant. Genesis 6:11-12 adds more detail. "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways." Violence filled the earth, corruption spread everywhere. The image of God in humanity had been twisted and distorted beyond recognition. The world God had called very good had become thoroughly broken. Then Genesis 6:6 tells us something heartbreaking. "The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain." The Creator looked at his creation and felt deep sorrow. The same God who had breathed life into Adam, who had walked in the garden in the cool of the day, who had made everything with such care and delight, his heart was now filled with pain. So the Lord said in Genesis 6:7, "I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals, and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them." The judgment was total. Not just humanity, but the animals and birds too would be swept away. Creation itself would face the consequences of human rebellion. The wickedness had become so complete, so pervasive, that God determined to start over. But the text adds one crucial detail in Genesis 6:8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. In a world drowning in evil, one man stood out. One man was different. Genesis 6:9 says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. While everyone else ran from God, Noah walked with him. While everyone else pursued evil continually, Noah pursued righteousness. He wasn't perfect, but he was faithful. And because of that faithfulness, hope remained. God looked at Noah and gave him instructions that must have seemed impossible. Genesis 6:14-16 records God's command. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. This wasn't a small boat. This was a massive floating structure, 3 stories high, longer than a football field. The dimensions were precise and deliberate, designed for stability and capacity. Noah had probably never seen anything like it. No one had. There had never been a flood before, never been rain like what God was describing. The very concept would have sounded absurd to anyone who heard about it. But Noah didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He didn't demand proof. He simply started building. God explained what was coming. Genesis 6:17 says, I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. The judgment would be total and complete. But then God made a promise to Noah in Genesis 6:18, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. This was the first time the word covenant appears in the Bible. God was making a formal agreement with Noah, a binding promise that would preserve life through the coming destruction. God told Noah to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with him. Genesis 6:20 explains, 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. Notice, they would come to him. Noah wouldn't have to hunt them down or capture them. They would simply arrive. Also, God instructed in Genesis 6:21, you are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Provisions for months, maybe even a year or more. Food for his family and for every animal on the ark. Genesis 6:22 simply states, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. No shortcuts, no modifications, no questioning. Complete obedience. Then the Lord said to Noah in Genesis 7:1, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. God had searched the entire earth and found only one household worth saving. God gave more specific instructions about the animals. He told Noah in Genesis 7:2-3, Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 pairs of clean animals and birds, but only 1 pair of unclean animals. This distinction between clean and unclean existed even before the law was given to Moses centuries later. God set a deadline. He told Noah in Genesis 7:4, 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. 7 days to finish all preparations. 7 days before the world would end. Genesis 7:6-9 says, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark, as God had commanded Noah. Just as God had promised, the animals came. They walked, flew, and crawled to the ark, drawn by divine direction. It must have been an incredible sight, a parade of creatures making their way to this enormous wooden vessel. For 7 days they loaded the ark, and then, as Genesis 7:16 says, then the Lord shut him in. God himself closed the door. They were sealed inside, safe from what was coming. On the 17th day of the 2nd month of Noah's 600th year, something unprecedented happened. Genesis 7:11 describes it. On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Water came from above and below simultaneously. The sky opened up and the ground split open. Underground reservoirs exploded upward, while torrential rain poured down from above. And Genesis 7:12 says, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't weather. This was the unmaking of creation itself. Remember how God had separated the waters above from the waters below on the 2nd day of creation. Now those boundaries collapsed. The waters that had been held back were released with devastating force. Genesis 7:17-20 describes what happened next. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every mountain on earth covered. The highest peaks submerged under more than 20 feet of water. The entire world became an ocean. There was no high ground, no escape, nowhere to climb to safety. Everything was underwater. Genesis 7:21-23 tells us the devastating result. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, men and animals and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds of the air were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The judgment was complete and total. The violence and corruption that had filled the earth were washed away. Every person who had ignored Noah's warnings was gone. Every giant, every warrior, every evil thought, all silenced. The world that had broken God's heart was gone. Only the ark remained, floating on the surface of the deep with its precious cargo of life inside. Genesis 7:24 adds one more crucial detail. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. 40 days of rain, then 150 days of standing water covering everything. 5 months where the ark drifted on an endless ocean with no land visible anywhere. Inside that wooden vessel, Noah and his family cared for the animals, day after day, week after week, month after month, trusting that God had not forgotten them, even though they could see nothing but water stretching to the horizon in every direction. But God had not forgotten. Genesis 8:1 says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded." Oh, the same God who had opened the floodgates now sent wind to begin drying the earth. The water that had destroyed the world now began to drain away. Genesis 8:2-3 tells us, "Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down." Genesis 8:4 records a significant moment, "And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat." Exactly 5 months after the flood began, the ark stopped floating. It had found solid ground. Somewhere beneath them was a mountain peak, though water still covered everything around them. Genesis 8:5 says, "The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible." Slowly, gradually, the world was re-emerging. Mountain peaks broke through the surface of the water like islands appearing in an ocean. Noah waited patiently. After 40 more days, he decided to test whether the water had receded enough for them to leave. Genesis 8:6-7 describes what he did. After 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. The raven was a strong bird, capable of flying long distances and surviving by scavenging. It could find floating debris or rest on exposed rocks. So it went out and returned, out and returned. But this didn't tell Noah much about whether the ground below was truly ready for life to resume. So Genesis 8:8-9 says, "Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find no place to set its feet because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark." The dove was different from the raven. Doves need trees and dry ground where they can nest. They need places where plants grow and where they can find food. Finding neither, finding nowhere safe to rest, the dove came back to the safety of the ark. This told Noah that the earth wasn't ready yet. He waited 7 more days, then sent the dove out again. This time, something completely different happened. Genesis 8:10-11 records the moment. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. An olive leaf, fresh and green. This small piece of vegetation was enormous news. It meant trees were alive again somewhere, plants were growing, leaves were sprouting. The earth was healing from the devastation. Life was returning to the world. Hope had a physical form carried in that dove's beak. But Noah was patient and didn't rush. He waited another 7 days and sent the dove out a 3rd time. Genesis 8:12 says, "He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him." The dove had found a permanent home outside the ark. It had found food, shelter, a place to build a nest and live. The earth was truly ready now. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Genesis 8:13 tells us, "Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry." He could see with his own eyes now. Dry ground stretched out before him after over a year of seeing only water. But Noah still waited patiently for God's direct permission to leave. It wasn't until the 27th day of the 2nd month that the earth was completely dry, according to Genesis 8:14. They had been inside the ark for 1 full year and 10 days. Over a year of caring for animals, living in extremely close quarters with family, maintaining the vessel, and trusting in God's perfect timing. Then God spoke to Noah with clear instructions. Genesis 8:15-17 records his words. "Then God said to Noah, 'Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it.'" The wait was finally over. So Genesis 8:18-19 says, "So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives. All the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth, came out of the ark, one kind after another." They stepped out onto a clean, empty, washed earth. Everything was new. Everything was fresh. The world had been cleansed, and they were the only humans alive on the entire planet. The first thing Noah did after emerging was worship. Genesis 8:20 says, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it." This explains why God had commanded 7 pairs of clean animals, so there would be enough for sacrifice and worship while still having enough to reproduce and repopulate. Noah's very first act in the New World wasn't to build a house or plant crops, but to give thanks to the God who had saved him and his family. The smell of the sacrifice rose up to heaven, and Genesis 8:21 tells us something remarkable. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done." This was a stunning acknowledgement. God stated clearly that the flood hadn't changed fundamental human nature. The heart of man was still bent toward evil from childhood. The same wickedness and corruption that had led to the flood in the first place was still present deep in human hearts. But God made a decision based not on human goodness or improvement, but purely on his own grace and mercy. He would never again destroy all life with a flood, regardless of how evil humanity became. Genesis 8:22 records his promise about the natural order. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. The rhythm of creation would continue uninterrupted. The seasons would keep cycling. Life would go on. Then God blessed Noah and his sons with the same command given to Adam. Genesis 9:1 says, "Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth.'" Humanity had a fresh start, a clean slate, a second chance to fill the earth and live according to God's design. Then God established a formal covenant with Noah and his descendants. Genesis 9:9-11 records this covenant. "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." But God didn't just speak this promise into the air. He gave a visible, lasting sign that everyone could see. Genesis 9:12-13 says, "And God said, 'This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth.'" Genesis 9:14-16 continues with more detail. "Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." The rainbow became a permanent reminder, not just for humanity to see and remember, but remarkably for God himself to see and remember his promise. Every time rain clouds gathered and people might fear another worldwide flood, the rainbow would appear in the sky as God's signature, his absolute guarantee that the waters would never again rise to destroy all life on earth. Noah and his 3 sons began the work of repopulating the earth. Genesis 9:18-19 tells us, "The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the 3 sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Every single person alive today, every nation, every tribe, every family descended from these three men, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All of humanity traces back to Noah's sons. Noah transitioned from ark builder to farmer. Genesis 9:20 says, Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. He worked the ground, cultivated grapevines, and eventually the vineyard produced fruit. Time passed, perhaps several years, and Noah made wine from his grapes. But one day something went terribly wrong. Genesis 9:21 records the incident. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Noah, the righteous man who had walked faithfully with God, who had built the ark and saved humanity, now lay drunk and naked in his tent. It was a moment of weakness, vulnerability, and deep shame. Even the greatest heroes of faith had their failures and moments of stumbling. Then Genesis 9:22 tells us what happened next. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. Ham entered the tent, saw his father lying there in this shameful, exposed condition, and instead of immediately and quietly covering his father, he went outside and told his brothers about what he had seen. The text suggests more than an accidental glimpse. There was something dishonorable in Ham's response, something that showed mockery or disrespect for his father's dignity and position. But Shem and Japheth responded in a completely different manner. Genesis 9:23 carefully describes their honorable actions. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they would not see their father's nakedness. They deliberately protected their father's dignity and honor. They covered his shame without looking at what they shouldn't see. They walked backward into the tent, so their eyes would never fall on their father's nakedness. They honored him even in his weakest, most vulnerable moment. This was true respect, genuine honor, and love demonstrated through action. When Noah eventually woke up from his wine and somehow found out what his youngest son had done to him, he spoke with prophetic authority. Genesis 9:24-27 records his powerful words. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave." Notice something important. Noah didn't curse Ham directly, but instead cursed Canaan, who was Ham's son. This curse would echo and reverberate through history, affecting the descendants of Canaan, who would become the Canaanites, and their future relationship with the descendants of Shem and Japheth. The blessing on Shem indicated that God would be specially and uniquely connected to Shem's family line. The blessing on Japheth spoke of expansion and a harmonious relationship with Shem's descendants. Genesis 9:28-29 concludes Noah's story. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Altogether, Noah lived 950 years, and then he died. Noah lived long enough to see multiple generations multiply and spread after the flood. He watched the world slowly repopulate. Then he died, having faithfully served God through the greatest catastrophe in all of human history. As people multiplied and spread across the earth after the flood, they all spoke one language and used the same words, according to Genesis 11:1. This complete unity of language meant they could communicate perfectly with each other, cooperate fully on any project, and accomplish anything they collectively set their minds to achieve. There were no misunderstandings, no translation difficulties, no communication barriers whatsoever. Genesis 11:2 tells us what happened as they migrated. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Shinar was located in Mesopotamia, the fertile region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Instead of continuing to spread out across the world and fill the earth as God had clearly commanded both Adam and Noah, they made a deliberate decision to stop. They found a comfortable, flat, fertile place and decided to stay together in one location. They developed impressive new technology for their time. Genesis 11:3 records their innovative conversation. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. This was genuine innovation. They were manufacturing uniform, standardized building materials rather than simply using irregular stones they found scattered in nature. With these baked bricks, they could build much bigger, taller, and stronger structures than ever before. With tar bubbling up from the ground serving as waterproof mortar, they could seal everything tight and secure. Then they announced their ambitious plan to each other. Genesis 11:4 says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth.'" Listen carefully to their stated motivations. First, they wanted to build both a city and a tower reaching up to the heavens. This tower would be a ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid with a temple at the very top. Second, they explicitly wanted to make a name for themselves, to become famous, to be remembered throughout history, to demonstrate their power. Third, they clearly stated they were doing all of this specifically to avoid being scattered across the face of the earth. But God had directly commanded humanity to fill the earth, and these people were united in their rebellion against that command. The people worked together on their city and tower, and the construction progressed steadily. But Genesis 11:5 says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building." The irony is clear. They were building to reach heaven, yet God had to come down just to see it. Genesis 11:6 records God's assessment. "The Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them.'" United humanity had unlimited potential, but they were using it in the wrong direction. So God intervened. Genesis 11:7 says, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Genesis 11:8 tells us the immediate result. "So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city." One moment, they communicated perfectly. The next, they couldn't understand each other. The work stopped instantly. Genesis 11:9 explains that is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. The very thing they tried to prevent, being scattered, happened anyway as divine judgment. After Babel, the Bible narrows its focus to one family line. Genesis 11:10 begins. This is the account of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. Genesis 11:12-13 continues. When Arphaxad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And after he became the father of Shelah, Arphaxad lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. The lifespans were decreasing. Shelah lived 433 years, Eber lived 464 years, but then Peleg lived only 239 years according to Genesis 11:14-19. The line continued through Roy, who lived 239 years, Serug, who lived 230 years, and Nahor, who lived 148 years, as recorded in Genesis 11:20-25. Genesis 11:26 says, "After Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran." But Genesis 11:28 tells us, while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Genesis 11:29-30 provides crucial information. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren. She had no children. Abram's wife couldn't have children, a tragedy in that culture. Genesis 11:31 tells us, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. They left Ur heading toward Canaan, but stopped halfway. Genesis 11:32 concludes, Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. The old man died without reaching Canaan. But Abram remained, married to a barren woman living in a foreign city. No one could have guessed God was about to call this childless man and make him the father of nations. The Lord spoke to Abram while he was still living in Haran. Genesis 12:1-3 records God's call. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This was an enormous ask. God was telling Abram to leave everything familiar, his homeland, his extended family, his father's house, and go to a place God hadn't even named yet. And the promise seemed impossible. How could God make him into a great nation when his wife Sarai was barren? But Genesis 12:4 says, "So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him." Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. 75 years old. Most people that age would be settling down, not starting over, but Abram obeyed. Genesis 12:5 continues, "He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. When they reached Canaan, Abram traveled through the land. Genesis 12:6-7 tells us, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'To your offspring I will give this land.' So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him." Notice what God promised, not to Abram himself, but to his offspring. His children would possess this land, but Abram still had no children. Then famine struck. Genesis 12:10 says, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe." In Egypt, Abram made a terrible decision out of fear. He told Sarai to say she was his sister because she was so beautiful. He feared the Egyptians would kill him to take her. Genesis 12:15 records what happened. "And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. But God intervened." Genesis 12:17 says, "But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. Pharaoh figured it out and confronted Abram." Genesis 12:18-19 records his words. "So Pharaoh summoned Abram. 'What have you done to me?' he said. 'Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go.' Pharaoh sent them away with all their possessions. Abram returned to Canaan, now very wealthy. But he and Lot had so many possessions that the land couldn't support both their herds. Genesis 13:7 says, "And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. So they separated. Abram let Lot choose first." Genesis 13:10-11 tells us, "Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt toward Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. After Lot left, God spoke to Abram again with an expanded promise. Genesis 13:14-17 records God's words. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." Time passed, and Abram still had no children. Then God came to him in a vision. Genesis 15:1 says, "After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram was troubled. Genesis 15:2-3 records his honest response. But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." God reassured him. Genesis 15:4-5 says, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, 'This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir.' He took him outside and said, 'Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them.' Then he said to him, 'So shall your offspring be.'" Genesis 15:6 records Abram's response. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Then God made a formal covenant. He told Abram to bring specific animals: a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. Genesis 15:10 says, "Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half." As the sun was setting, Genesis 15:12 tells us, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. God warned that Abram's descendants would be enslaved for 400 years in a foreign country, but then would come out with great possessions. Then came the covenant ceremony. Genesis 15:17-18 describes it. "When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates.'" Only God passed through the pieces. Abram didn't. God was binding himself alone to keep this promise. 10 years had passed since Abram came to Canaan, and Sarai still had no children. So she came up with a plan. Genesis 16:1-2 records what she said. "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her.'" This was a common cultural practice, but it wasn't God's plan. Genesis 16:2 says, Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Sarai gave Hagar to Abram as a wife, and he slept with her. Genesis 16:4 tells us what happened. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. The household dynamics immediately became toxic. Sarai blamed Abram. Genesis 16:5 records her complaint. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abram told her in Genesis 16:6, "Your servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best." So Sarai mistreated Hagar, and Hagar fled into the desert. But God found Hagar. Genesis 16:7-8 says, "The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, 'Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?' 'I'm running away from my mistress Sarai,' she answered. The angel gave her instructions. Genesis 16:9-11 records his words. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Genesis 16:12 described what Ishmael would be like. "He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." Hagar was amazed that God had seen her. She went back to Sarai. Genesis 16:15-16 concludes, "So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born." Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. But Ishmael was not the promised son. 13 years passed. Abram was now 99, and Ishmael was 13. Then God appeared to Abram again. Genesis 17:1-2 records, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, 'I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers.'" God changed his name. Genesis 17:4-5 says, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." God also changed Sarai's name. Genesis 17:15-16 says, "God also said to Abraham, 'As for Sarai your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham's response was remarkable. Genesis 17:17 tells us, "Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, 'Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? But God was clear. Genesis 17:19 records his response. "Then God said, 'Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him.'" Later, God appeared to Abraham with 2 angels in human form. Genesis 18:1-2 says, "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. Abraham prepared a meal for them. As they ate, one asked where Sarah was. Then Genesis 18:10 records what he said. "Then the Lord said, 'I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son.'" Sarah was listening behind him. Genesis 18:11-12 tells us Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure?" She laughed just like Abraham had, but God heard her. Genesis 18:13-14 records, "Then the Lord said to Abraham, 'Why did Sarah laugh and say, "Will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied laughing, but Genesis 18:15 says, "But he said, 'Yes, you did laugh.'" God knew the truth and would keep his promise. After the meal, the visitors looked toward Sodom where Lot lived. God decided to tell Abraham what he planned to do. Genesis 18:20-21 records God's words. "Then the Lord said, 'The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know.'" Abraham began to negotiate with God for the cities. Genesis 18:23-24 says, "Then Abraham approached him and said, 'Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it?' God agreed to spare the city if 50 righteous people were found. Abraham kept lowering the number: 45, 40, 30, 20. Finally, Genesis 18:32 records Abraham's last request. Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." God agreed, then left. But there weren't even 10 righteous people in Sodom. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom, and Lot invited them to his house. But Genesis 19:4-5 says, "Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we can have sex with them.' The wickedness was complete. The angels struck the men with blindness and told Lot to flee." Genesis 19:13 records their warning. "We are going to destroy this place." The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. At dawn, the angels urged Lot to hurry. Genesis 19:15-16 says, "With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, 'Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished.' When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. One of them said in Genesis 19:17, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." Then came judgment. Genesis 19:24-25 describes it. "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land." But Lot's wife disobeyed. Genesis 19:26 says, "But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt." Genesis 19:29 adds an important note. "So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived." God saved Lot because of Abraham. The impossible happened. Genesis 21:1-2 records the fulfillment. "Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born." Genesis 21:6 records Sarah's joy. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." The child grew, but problems arose with Ishmael. Sarah demanded Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. God told Abraham to listen to Sarah because the covenant would continue through Isaac. Then came Abraham's greatest test. Genesis 22:1-2 records what God asked. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." This must have shattered Abraham's heart. But Genesis 22:3 says, "Early the next morning Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. After 3 days they reached the place." Genesis 22:6-7 tells us, "Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, 'Father?' 'Yes, my son?' Abraham replied. 'The fire and wood are here,' Isaac said, 'but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?' Abraham answered in Genesis 22:8, 'God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son.' When they reached the place, Abraham built an altar and arrange the wood. Then Genesis 22:9-10 describes the moment. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But God stopped him. Genesis 22:11-12 says, "But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, 'Abraham, Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. 'Do not lay a hand on the boy,' he said. 'Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son.' Then Abraham looked up. Genesis 22:13 records what he saw. Abraham looked up, and there, in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. God had provided a substitute. The ram died in Isaac's place. Years passed, and Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. The servant met Rebekah and brought her back. Genesis 24:67 says, "Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. But Rebekah was barren like Sarah." Genesis 25:21 tells us, "Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant." Isaac prayed for 20 years before God answered. But this pregnancy was unusual. Genesis 25:22 says, "The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. God gave her an answer. Genesis 25:23 records his words. "The Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.'" When she gave birth, Genesis 25:24-26 describes what happened. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up completely different. Genesis 25:27-28 says, "The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents." Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. One day, Esau came in famished from hunting. Genesis 25:30-31 records their conversation. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau didn't care about the future. Genesis 25:32-33 says, "Look, I'm about to die." Esau said, "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Genesis 25:34 concludes, "Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Later, when Isaac was old and nearly blind, he prepared to bless Esau. But Rebekah overheard and helped Jacob deceive Isaac to receive the blessing instead. Jacob dressed in Esau's clothes and covered his arms with goatskins to feel hairy. Jacob lied to his father, saying he was Esau. Isaac blessed him, thinking he was blessing Esau. When Esau discovered what happened, Genesis 27:41 says, "Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, 'The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob.'" Rebekah told Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran, so Jacob left, running from his brother's murderous rage. Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. Genesis 28:10-11 tells us, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. That night God met Jacob in a dream. Genesis 28:12-13 describes the vision. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. This was the first time God spoke directly to Jacob. Despite everything Jacob had done, God was confirming the covenant with him. Genesis 28:14-15 records the promise. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob woke up, he was amazed. Genesis 28:16-17 says, When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Jacob set up the stone as a pillar and named the place Bethel, which means house of God. Then he made a vow. Genesis 28:20-22 records his words. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me I will give you a tenth. Jacob continued toward Haran, carrying God's promise with him. Jacob settled in Canaan and had 12 sons, but one stood out. Genesis 37:3 tells us, Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. This special robe was a visible symbol of favoritism. It was beautiful, expensive, and set Joseph apart from his brothers. Genesis 37:4 says, When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Then Joseph made things worse by sharing his dreams. Genesis 37:5-7 records, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Genesis 37:8 says, His brothers said to him, Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Joseph had another dream. Genesis 37:9-10 records, Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. When they saw him coming, they plotted to kill him. Genesis 37:19-20 says, Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Reuben tried to save him, convincing them to throw Joseph into a cistern instead. Genesis 37:23-24 tells us, So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. While Joseph was trapped, they saw a caravan. Genesis 37:26-27 records Judah's suggestion. Judah said to his brothers, What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. Genesis 37:28 says, "So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. They killed a goat and dipped Joseph's robe in blood." Genesis 37:32-33 records Jacob's response. "They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, 'We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe.' He recognized it and said, 'It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Genesis 37:34-35 describes Jacob's grief. "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. 'No,' he said, 'in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son.' So his father wept for him." Meanwhile, Genesis 37:36 tells us, "The Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. In Egypt, Joseph worked in Potiphar's house." Genesis 39:2-3 says, "The Lord was with Joseph and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his entire household, but Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph." Genesis 39:7 says, "And after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, 'Come to bed with me.' Joseph refused, explaining that this would be a betrayal of Potiphar's trust and a sin against God. But she kept pressuring him day after day. One day, when no one else was home, she grabbed him. Genesis 39:12 tells us she caught him by his cloak and said, 'Come to bed with me.' But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Furious at rejection, she falsely accused Joseph. Genesis 39:19-20 says, "When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, 'This is how your slave treated me,' he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Joseph was innocent but imprisoned." Yet Genesis 39:21 tells us, "But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden." The warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. Later, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker were imprisoned there. Both had dreams one night. Joseph interpreted both accurately. The cupbearer would be restored in 3 days. The baker would be executed. Genesis 40:14-15 records Joseph's request to the cupbearer. "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Everything happened as Joseph said. But Genesis 40:23 adds, "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." 2 years later, Pharaoh had troubling dreams. The cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. Genesis 41:14 says, "So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh." Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. He advised storing grain during the good years. Genesis 41:39-41 records Pharaoh's response. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Genesis 41:42-43 describes the transformation. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old. The 7 years of abundance came, and Joseph stored grain. Then the famine began. The famine spread beyond Egypt. Genesis 41:57 says, "And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the world." The famine reached Canaan. Genesis 42:1-2 records, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you just keep looking at each other?' He continued, 'I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die.' 10 brothers went to Egypt. Jacob kept Benjamin at home. When they arrived, Genesis 42:6-8 tells us, "Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. 'Where do you come from?' he asked. 'From the land of Canaan,' they replied, 'to buy food.' Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph's dreams were coming true. He accused them of being spies and tested them. He kept Simeon in prison and demanded they return with Benjamin. As they prepared to leave, they talked among themselves. Genesis 42:21-22 records, "They said to one another, 'Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us.' Reuben replied, 'Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you wouldn't listen? Now we must give an accounting for his blood.'" Genesis 42:23-24 says, "They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again. Eventually, they returned with Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin, Genesis 43:30 says, "Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there." Joseph set up one final test, placing his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When it was found, Judah pleaded for Benjamin's life, offering to become a slave in his place. Genesis 44:33-34 records Judah's offer. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father." This broke Joseph. Genesis 45:1-3 says, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, 'Have everyone leave my presence.' So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still living?' But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence." Genesis 45:4-5 records his words. "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you.'" Joseph invited them to bring the entire family to Egypt. They returned to Canaan with the news. Genesis 45:26-28 records Jacob's response. "They told him, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt.' Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, 'I'm convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'" Jacob and his family, 70 people, moved to Egypt. Genesis 46:29-30 describes the reunion. Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph settled them in Goshen. Before Jacob died, he blessed his sons. Genesis 50:24-26 records Joseph's death. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Time passed, many generations. Exodus 1:6-7 tells us, "Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. The Israelites grew from one family into a nation. Then everything changed. Exodus 1:8 says, "Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt." This Pharaoh saw the Israelites as a threat. Exodus 1:9-10 records his words. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So the Egyptians enslaved them. Exodus 1:11 says, "So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh." But Exodus 1:12 says, "But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites." Pharaoh ordered the Hebrew midwives to kill baby boys. Exodus 1:15-16 records, "The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, 'When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live.'" But Exodus 1:17 says, "The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. God blessed them for their courage." Frustrated, Pharaoh gave a public order. Exodus 1:22 says, "Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, 'Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live.'" A Levite couple had a son. Exodus 2:2 says, "She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him anymore," Exodus 2:3 tells us, "But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile." Exodus 2:5-6 records what happened. "Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. 'This is one of the Hebrew babies,' she said. The baby's sister approached. Exodus 2:7-8 says, "Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?' 'Yes, go,' she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother." Exodus 2:9 continues, "Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you.' So the woman took the baby and nursed him. The mother was paid to care for her own child. When he grew older," Exodus 2:10 says, "When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. she named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Moses grew up in the palace, but knew his Hebrew identity. One day, Exodus 2:11-12 tells us, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When Pharaoh heard about it, he tried to kill Moses. Moses fled to Midian, where he married and became a shepherd. Exodus 2:23-25 tells us, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Moses spent 40 years as a shepherd. He was now 80 years old. Then one day changed everything. Exodus 3:1-2 describes it. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. Exodus 3:3-4 says, So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, and Moses said, Here I am. Exodus 3:5 records, Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Exodus 3:6 says, Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Exodus 3:7-10 records God's mission. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses felt inadequate. He asked what to say if they asked God's name. Exodus 3:14-15 records God's answer. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. Moses made more excuses, so God gave him miraculous signs and allowed Aaron to speak for him. Finally, Moses agreed and returned to Egypt. Exodus 4:29-31 tells us, Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh. Exodus 5:1 records, Afterward Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert. Exodus 5:2 says, Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Pharaoh refused and made their work harder. Then God sent 10 plagues against Egypt. The first turned the Nile to blood. Exodus 7:20-21 says, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. The second brought frogs everywhere. The third turned dust into gnats. The fourth sent swarms of flies, but only on Egyptians. The fifth killed Egyptian livestock. The sixth brought painful boils. The seventh sent devastating hail. Exodus 9:23-25 describes it. When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell, and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both men and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The eighth brought locusts. Exodus 10:14-15 says, "They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt." The ninth was 3 days of darkness. Exodus 10:22-23 says, "So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or leave his place for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. And after 9 plagues, Pharaoh's heart remained hard. Now God would send one final plague. God told Moses about the final plague. Exodus 11:4-6 records, "So Moses said, 'This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the slave girl who is at her hand mill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again.' But God provided protection for the Israelites. Exodus 12:3-7 records the instructions. "Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs." Exodus 12:12-13 explains why. "On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. The blood on the doorframe would cause the destroyer to pass over that house." Exodus 12:8-11 gave instructions for eating. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roast it over the fire, head, legs, and inner parts. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." The Israelites obeyed. At midnight the plague struck. Exodus 12:29-30 describes it. "At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Every Egyptian household lost someone, but in Israelite homes marked with blood, everyone was safe. Pharaoh summoned Moses. Exodus 12:31-32 records, "During the night Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, 'Up, "Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The Israelites left. Exodus 12:37-39 tells us, the Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, as well as large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough they had brought from Egypt, they baked cakes of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast, because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Exodus 12:40-41 adds, "Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. After 430 years in Egypt, the Israelites walked out free, carrying Joseph's bones with them. God had delivered them. The Israelites left Egypt with great celebration, but their freedom didn't last long without a fight. Pharaoh changed his mind. Exodus 14:5 tells us, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So Pharaoh prepared his army. Exodus 14:6-7 says, "So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them." The entire Egyptian military force pursued the Israelites into the wilderness. The Israelites were camped by the Red Sea when they saw the Egyptian army approaching. They panicked. Exodus 14:10-12 records their fear. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." They were trapped. The sea was in front of them, mountains on both sides, and the Egyptian army behind them. But Moses responded with confidence. Exodus 14:13-14 records his words. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then God told Moses what to do. Exodus 14:16 says, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." Moses obeyed. Exodus 14:21-22 describes what happened. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The entire nation walked through the sea on dry ground. The water stood up like walls on both sides. The Egyptians pursued them into the sea. Exodus 14:23-24 says, "The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. Then God told Moses to stretch out his hand again." Exodus 14:26-28 records what happened. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. The Egyptian army was completely destroyed. Exodus 14:30-31 says, "That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant." After the victory at the Red Sea, the Israelites traveled into the desert of Shur. 3 days later, they came to Marah, but the water there was bitter and they couldn't drink it. The people grumbled against Moses. God showed Moses a piece of wood, and when he threw it into the water became sweet. They continued to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. But then they entered the desert of Sin. Exodus 16:2-3 records their complaint. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." They were hungry and afraid. They even wished they had died in Egypt rather than face starvation in the wilderness. But God was about to teach them about daily dependence on him. Exodus 16:4 records God's response. "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." God would provide bread from heaven, but with specific rules. They could only gather enough for 1 day at a time. This would test whether they trusted God to provide again tomorrow. That evening, quail came and covered the camp, providing meat. Then in the morning, something appeared on the ground. Exodus 16:13-15 describes it. In the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." They called it manna, which means, "What is it?" Exodus 16:31 describes what it was like. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. God gave specific instructions about gathering it. Exodus 16:16-18 says, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. No matter how much they gathered, everyone had exactly what they needed. Then Moses gave them a command. Exodus 16:19 says, "Then Moses said to them, 'No one is to keep any of it until morning.'" But some people didn't listen. Exodus 16:20 tells us, "However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. The manna couldn't be stored. They had to trust God for fresh provision each day. But on the 6th day, they were to gather twice as much because no manna would fall on the Sabbath." Exodus 16:22-24 says, "On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much. 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, 'This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning.' So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. On the 6th day, the manna kept fresh overnight, so they could rest on the Sabbath. Some people went out on the 7th day to gather, but found nothing." Exodus 16:27-30 records, "Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the seventh day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the seventh day. God provided manna every single day for 40 years. Exodus 16:35 says, "The Israelites ate manna 40 years, until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan." The Israelites continued their journey and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Once again, they quarreled with Moses. Exodus 17:2-3 records their complaint. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" They were desperate and angry. Their thirst made them forget all the miracles God had already done for them. Moses cried out to God. Exodus 17:4 says, "Then Moses cried out to the Lord, 'What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me.'" God gave Moses specific instructions. Exodus 17:5-6 records them. The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." Mut. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Moses struck the rock with his staff, and water gushed out. The people and their livestock drank. Exodus 17:7 says, "And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?'" The names Massah and Meribah mean testing and quarreling. After this, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites. Moses told Joshua to choose men and fight while he stood on top of the hill with the staff of God in his hands. Exodus 17:11-13 describes the battle. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. The victory depended on Moses keeping his hands raised. When he couldn't do it alone, Aaron and Hur supported him until the battle was won. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites came to the desert of Sinai and camped at the base of Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:3-6 records God's message through Moses. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." The people agreed to obey everything God said. Then God told Moses to prepare the people because he would come down on the mountain in 3 days. Exodus 19:10-13 gives the instructions. "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. He shall surely be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on him. Whether man or animal, he shall not be permitted to live. And only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they go up to the mountain.' The mountain was holy, and anyone who touched it would die. On the third day, something terrifying happened. Exodus 19:16-19 describes it. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The entire mountain was on fire, covered in smoke, shaking violently. God came down in fire and spoke. Then God called Moses to the top of the mountain and gave him the 10 Commandments. Exodus 21:17 records them. And God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. The people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet. Exodus 20:18-19 says, When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die. They were terrified of God's presence. Moses went into the thick darkness where God was, and God gave him many more laws and instructions for how the people should live. Moses stayed on the mountain with God for 40 days and 40 nights. During this time, God gave him detailed instructions for building the tabernacle and wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 stone tablets with his own finger. But down below, the people grew impatient. Exodus 32:1 records what happened. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron gave in to their demands. Exodus 32:2-4 tells us what he did. Aaron answered them, Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Aaron built an altar in front of the calf and announced a festival. The next day, the people offered sacrifices and sat down to eat and drink, then got up to indulge in revelry. They were worshipping a golden calf, breaking the very first commandment God had just given them. God told Moses what was happening. Exodus 32:7-10 records God's words. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol, cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it, and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses pleaded with God to spare the people. Exodus 32:11-14 records his intercession. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses went down the mountain carrying the 2 stone tablets. When he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned. Exodus 32:19 says, "When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain." Moses destroyed the golden calf. Exodus 32:20 tells us, "And he took the calf they had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it." Then Moses confronted Aaron, who made weak excuses. Moses stood at the entrance to the camp and said in Exodus 32:26, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." The Levites rallied to him, and Moses commanded them to go through the camp with swords. About 3,000 people died that day as punishment for the idolatry. The next day, Moses told the people they had committed a great sin. He went back up the mountain to plead with God for them. Exodus 32:31-32 records his prayer. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Moses was willing to be blotted out if it meant the people could be saved. God forgave them, but said there would still be consequences for their sin. After dealing with the sin of the golden calf, Moses received new stone tablets with the commandments. Then God gave detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where God would dwell among his people. Exodus 25:8-9 records God's purpose. "Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." God gave specific measurements and materials for every part. The people were to bring offerings of gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, animal skins, acacia wood, oil, spices, and precious stones. Exodus 35:21 says, "And everyone who was willing and whose heart moved him came and brought an offering to the Lord for the work on the tent of meeting." The people gave so generously that the craftsmen had to tell Moses to stop the offerings. Exodus 36:5-7 records, "And they said to Moses, 'The people are bringing more than enough for doing the work the Lord commanded to be done.' Then Moses gave an order, and they sent this word throughout the camp: 'No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary.' And so the people were restrained from bringing more, because what they already had was more than enough to do all the work. And God chose Bezalel and Oholiab and filled them with his spirit, giving them skill and ability to do all kinds of crafts. They made the tabernacle exactly according to God's design. The tent itself with its curtains and coverings, the Ark of the Covenant, the table for the bread of the presence, the golden lampstand, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, the bronze basin, the courtyard, and the priestly garments. When everything was finished, Moses inspected the work. Exodus 39:42-43 says, "The Israelites had done all the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Moses inspected the work and saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. So Moses blessed them. Then Moses set up the tabernacle." Exodus 40:33-35 describes what happened. "Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." God's presence filled the tabernacle so powerfully that even Moses couldn't enter. Exodus 40:36-38 tells us how God led them. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel during all their travels. God was dwelling among his people, leading them by his presence. The Israelites traveled from Mount Sinai to the desert of Paran. Then God told Moses to send men to explore Canaan, the land he was giving them. Moses sent 12 men, one leader from each tribe. Numbers 13:17-20 records Moses' instructions. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, "Go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land." The spies explored the land for 40 days. When they returned, they brought back a cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it on a pole. Numbers 13:27 records their report. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." The land was everything God promised. But then came the bad news. Numbers 13:28-29 continues, "But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan." 10 of the spies gave a negative report, spreading fear among the people. Numbers 13:31-33 records their words. "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are.' And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, 'The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them.'" Only 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, had faith that God would give them victory. Caleb tried to encourage the people. Numbers 13:30 says, "Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, 'We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it.' But the people refused to listen." Numbers 14:1-4 records their rebellion. "That night all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, 'If only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?' And they said to each other, 'We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt.' Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes and pleaded with the people. Numbers 14:7-9 records their words. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the assembly talked about stoning them. Then God's glory appeared, and God told Moses he would strike the people with a plague and destroy them. Moses interceded for the people, and God forgave them. But there were consequences. Numbers 14:26-35 records God's judgment. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites, so tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. In this desert your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But your bodies will fall in this desert. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the desert. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you." Because the people refused to trust God, they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation died. Only their children would enter the promised land. The Israelites continued wandering in the wilderness. They traveled around Edom and grew impatient on the way. Numbers 21:4-5 records their complaint. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." They complained against God and Moses, despising the manna God provided daily. This time, God's judgment was swift and severe. Numbers 21:6 says, "Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died." The snakes were everywhere, biting people, and many died from the venom. The people quickly realized their sin and came to Moses. Numbers 21:7 records their confession. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. God gave Moses unusual instructions for healing. Numbers 21:8-9 tells us what God said and what Moses did. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, he lived. This was remarkable. Anyone who was bitten by a venomous snake only needed to look at the bronze snake on the pole, and they would be healed. They didn't have to do anything complicated, just look and live. It required faith to believe that simply looking at a bronze snake would heal them. But those who looked in faith were saved. Those who refused died from the venom. The bronze serpent became a picture of salvation through faith, looking to what God provided and trusting Him for life. If these stories have impacted you, if you've learned something new or seen these familiar accounts in a fresh way, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when we continue this journey through the Bible, exploring the stories of kings and prophets, the wisdom literature, and ultimately the fulfillment of all these promises in the New Testament. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear these foundational truths. Maybe it's a friend who's curious about the Bible but doesn't know where to start. Maybe it's a family member who grew up hearing these stories but needs to be reminded of God's faithfulness. Or maybe it's someone searching for hope and needs to know that the same God who parted seas and provided bread from heaven is still faithful today. Hit that subscribe button, share this video, and join us as we continue exploring the greatest story ever told. The story of God's love for humanity from Genesis to Revelation.